Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Snap No Tap podcast. I'm Tony Cecchine with Joe Cardinal, and we have one of the world's greatest grapplers and one of the world's greatest friends, one of the best friends I've ever had in my life. You've heard about him, you've read about him, you've seen him on color TV. Javier Palomo is our special guest today. But before we get to him, we got to do our announcements, which I'm going to turn over to the real reason everybody's here, to see or hear. I've been getting emails saying, as good looking as Joe is, he's much better looking when we hear him on the radio. So you take that for what it's worth. But we're going to turn it over to handsome Joe Cardinal.
And the real shame of this is they can never really smell me. They can hear me. Some of them can see me, but they miss the trifecta to get the full effect. But that's
when they have holograms eventually, shortly, can we smell the holograms or whatever or what?
We should make a pitch for that. I think that might be the business success thing is the smellable hologram. So I'm sure there's a market for it.
We'll call it a smellogram.
Yeah.
Okay.
But big pitches. First of all, we've got a sale going on, correct? Like a Black Friday sale for your products.
So yeah, and a matter of fact, the code is black, the word black with a capital B, 2022, one word, black 2022, but the numbers. Well, Joe will put it in the description, but for those of you who are listening. So it's 25% off of my downloads, digital things from today, which is the 20th of November to December 1st, 2022. So it's a long, extended version of a Black Friday, so it's a Black Sunday.
But yeah, definitely. If you've been looking to get any of Tony's videos, obviously the classics, Lost Art of Hooking, Snap No Tap, but there's a bunch of other content up there and exercise stuff as well. So please look to get those videos for your library. This would be a great time to jump on that. Upcoming seminars. So we just had the seminars this weekend, came off of some great seminars, working out with guys, a lot of good information. Next month, we're starting at Jason Bender's on the 17th. 1:30 p.m. is the time, and then at DuPage Krav Maga that same Sunday, so Saturday, Sunday, back-to-back seminars. That would be the 18th. So sign up for that. Otherwise, you're missing out. Great instruction there and great groups of guys to work out with. And of course, our membership sites. If you can't make those things, if you can't afford the downloads, at least show your support. If you enjoy the podcast, we've had really a really good streak of guests lately on this podcast. Terry Dow, Eric Paulson, Russell Stutley, Greg Millay, and now Javier. Just the hits keep coming. If you're enjoying this podcast, if you're getting good content and enjoying the conversation, please show your support by joining the monthly membership. There's 2 levels. The kind of Patreon 5 level, the $5 a month level at a minimum. But also there's a $10 a month level where we have additional video instruction content that's available only through that access. So those are our 2 things. But I think we've done all of our plugs and we're ready to go.
You need to be on PBS, like when they're having a fundraiser and shit. You're pretty good at that.
I do feel that we're missing tote bags. Like if we had Tony Cecchine tote bags to give away, we'd definitely bump our numbers up. So we'll look into that. Good thought.
Well, introduce the guy, the King of Kings.
Well, Javi, it was interesting. I was looking back. He was one of our first guests, appropriately so, obviously, because he was a longtime student of yours. But he's just been, it's hard to sum up all the things he's done. He's got black belts in, gi jiu-jitsu, in 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, judo, you've achieved high ranks in sambo. I'm trying to think what else he does. You know, he slices fries, he dices. Uh, but
Actually,
really,
those are things that I don't do. Come on.
yeah. But yeah, just, you know, won competitions all over, you know, all over the globe. He's always traveling and competing. And, you know, even if he wasn't one of our own, I think he'd be fascinating just to have a talk with. And so we're just super proud and excited to have him back on. So returning guest, it's been too long. Javi, what have you been up to?
Oh, you know, the usual, just training like a maniac and um, taking over a little bit more in a coaching role, really trying to bring up the next generation. So yeah, you know, that's the main thing. I teach and train full time now. I don't have a regular Joe job anymore.
Oh, I didn't know that. I
Um,
didn't know that.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
live the dream.
well, yeah. Some days it's more the dream than others. Um, some things don't change. Student accountability is still one of the biggest parts of the job, making sure the guys actually do what they say they're going to do, and when they don't, getting on them, but not getting on them too hard because they're the customer. It's a tricky balance some days.
Where's your gym, or tell us about this.
So I'm mainly teaching out of 3D MMA in Hanover Park, which is Dennis Dombrow's gym. We've got a sort of a mixed program with wrestling, jujitsu, kickboxing / Muay Thai. It's a small gym right now, but the student growth is pretty impressive. So we're kind of getting to the point where we need to start looking for bigger spots.
Good for you. You
Uh,
deserve it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Very much.
I teach 5 days a week, mostly in the evenings, but also during the day on weekends. Um, and yeah, no, overall, that's been a pretty primary focus for a while now. We've got some really good guys coming up. Dennis runs an event out of the gym that we call it Don't Tap Championship, and that's a submission only format grappling competition. And a bunch of the guys are pretty serious competitors. Just a small handful. We got a lot of students and only a few of them compete, as is pretty typical. But they're coming on up. They're really doing well for themselves.
Joe was thinking about opening up a tour, or like doing a tournament. We just discussed this Saturday. They were going to hold it at a restaurant, though, I guess, and they were going to call that "Don't Tip" tournament. Okay, because Joe's not known as a good tipper.
Is he a championship non-tipper? Is that what's going on here?
Well, with his looks, they tip him.
Oh,
I mean,
must
think
be
about
nice.
it.
Also,
I mean,
I
Rick
struggle a lot
Salo, we had
with math. So once I have to do percentages or adding and subtracting, that's just asking a little too much if you're asking me. So
I mean, you do have a phone. It's got a calculator app. I think there's ways around this with technology.
this is what you crazy kids and your fantasy ideas. Come on, that kind of stuff doesn't exist.
You're gonna hold up a brick phone any second now. One of the old ones with a little ring cable that the kids wouldn't even recognize these days.
Yeah. Oh man, I miss landlines, answering machines, the good old days.
Oh, answering machines. There's something I haven't thought about in years.
man.
Voicemail.
I'm a little bit older than you guys, and I can remember the rotary phones before push buttons.
I mean, I grew up in a house that had a rotary phone. I had a
Good.
pager back in the day.
I never had one.
Really?
No, I
You
never
have a
had a
Nextel?
pager.
I have one right now, actually. I have a
What in
pager.
God's name?
What? They still do those?
How does that work? I mean, I
Uh,
know how it works, but I'm just like, for what purpose do you actually have a pager?
well,
Is this how they get in touch with you, secret agents?
exactly. Let's just say certain people believe that is more reachable than cell phones. So, I'm not going to get into it too much. It's a work thing.
All right. I was sure it was. It was either
But-
that or, I think drug runners still use them probably.
Oh God, I knew you were going to
little
go
less
there.
traceable, right?
I knew you were going to go there, Javier. Shame on you. No,
It is what it is.
but it's fascinating that you left the corporate world, or what, not the business world, and you.
I don't know, yeah.
did-
No,
you
it
did
was
the thing.
definitely the corporate world.
Yeah, and you did the thing. I always complained that I should have went into that world, because by now I could have been retired and, whatever, but, you do what you got, you do what you do. I want to, we had Eric Paulson on, and well, Eric kind of talked about how he used to train, 20 or 30 years ago. And I've talked about how I used to train, but you're, 20 years older than when I first met you. So without getting into the techniques, or just how do you maintain your training at your age, and basically explain how many hours, what do you eat, that kind of jazz for other people to understand.
Yeah, so just a real quick, I didn't used to train as intensely in terms of the volume of hours as I do currently. I got laid off from my job years ago, and during that, it was the first time I'd ever been unemployed since I was like, I don't know, 15 or 16 years old, for more than like a week. And during that period of time, I'm like, well, I'm going to try and enjoy this. So I'll start going to classes, not just in the evenings after work, but I'll go to the morning classes. And when I've got time in the day, I'll go to some noon classes. And training full time like that, like a professional athlete, was a pretty eye-opening experience. I actually, like, in that moment, I kind of realized after like the first week of doing it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what actually makes me happy. This was probably my real calling my whole life, but I let typical views of what I should do kind of get in the way of that, and that's why I pursued a slightly different life path. But
can I ask how old you were when this happened?
Oh geez, this wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things. So I was, in my, man, I'd have to look back to be sure. I'm not the best with dates. But yeah, I was in my late 30s. It was just
okay.
So
not a young man. So you're training full time and still, kind of in
so
the
I was, I was working full time, training in the evenings, except on weekends when I could train during the day. And then that happened, and suddenly I'm like, I have an abundance of free time. I'm going to try and enjoy myself while still, looking for the next job. And I really enjoyed that, and for a variety of reasons. I accomplished quite a bit in terms of like getting some competitive goals out of the way in after that, where I realized, because a part of me was like, well, I can't train that much, like I don't even know if I can physically do it. But once I started doing it, I'm like, okay, this is definitely possible. I'm not too old for this. So when I did get a job, I actively worked to try and get a job that I could work around that training schedule. For a very, very good number of years, what ended up happening is I was working night shift, and I was training in the mornings and training in the evenings, and then basically going straight from the gym to work, to work my evening shift. So it was pretty typical for me to go to like a noontime class we would have, and then I would go home, take a nap, wake up, train some more in the evening / spend some time with my family, then go to work. Had showers at work, so if I was running late, that wasn't usually a problem. And I'd work until like 6 a.m, and then I'd just go home, get a meal, crash for a couple of hours, and wake back up and go to the noon classes. And I maintained that for a number of years until eventually I was done with corporate America, and that resulted in a lot better sleep. I'll say that much.
Well, you're hitting on something that a lot of people don't get, they can't fathom. Like, you were able to train full time. I used to train full time. And it's difficult for people who can't train full time to reach those higher levels, world-class levels. And many times they think, oh, the stuff I'm learning isn't good, or my instructor, but it's really, it's how much time you put in. Quality, as long as it's good quality. You were able to do that, which is great.
I'm going to say this, like as a coach, I'm trying to figure this out still, and we're working it to different degrees. Obviously, different sports have it worked out different ways. Judo and wrestling have pretty well-established programs in various countries. But the amount of mat time that is necessary to take someone from like very low skill to very high skill, where we're talking about like being able to compete at a national, international level, versus how much downtime they should have, how much supplemental cardio, supplemental strength and conditioning. Finding those numbers is actually pretty interesting stuff right now. But I do generally find that most athletes will over focus on either skill development, where they're going to classes where they're learning lots of stuff, or they'll over focus on the sparring element, rolling, training, whatever you want to call it, where they're not necessarily attending a lot of classes, but they are trying to get in a lot of rolling time. And the rolling time tends to beat guys up a lot more, obviously. But without the live element of it in proper amounts, then the technical work doesn't necessarily stick. It depends on like the manner in which people drill it, how they approach the training. So like if you're going to like, I don't know, let's say 7 classes a week, which is an enormous number of classes for most people, but like my average week is 13 plus, then you're probably going to want to spar more than you strictly need to on certain days. Whereas like, how do I explain this? Like if you're only going like twice a week, which I think is pretty typical for a lot of people, then you're like, oh, I can't wait to learn stuff. And you get your technique in, and then you're like, I can't wait to roll. And then for a lot of guys, they're like, okay, well, I'm going to go more times a week, but I only want to go like heavy rolling on one night so that I can let my body rest. And then they'll do like a weird balance of like rolling versus technique. And they try to find that balance. And what I've just kind of done is I roll basically every day, oftentimes twice a day, but certainly not with like murderous intensity with every single roll. When I'm going with a guy who's less skilled, I can chill out. I can work on specific things. And then the technical work, like in the classes that I'm running, I'm in control of what's being taught. So I can work on stuff that I personally need to progress in, that I also feel my students need to progress in. Whereas when I wasn't in control of the curriculum, it'd be very difficult to just be like, show up and like, okay, well, this is the theme of the day. It's not something I need personally to work on right now for whatever I've got coming up. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily see the same kind of progress in technique. And then of course, since you're not working on something that you're trying to work on in your own game and practice, you don't get the repetition and the reinforcement of the live drills the same way, live rolling. So finding that happy balance is pretty difficult for a lot of guys, especially the guys that are doing this more or less part-time.
Yeah, no, it is. And because I through the years of, if not in person, I would get emails from people from wherever, and asking me, how long will it take to get good? Or like with the Tri-C program, that's the first, how long will it take? It's not can't answer that because, how much
Right.
time do you have to put in, and that isn't even accurate because some people are quicker learners or, whatever, or already have established, background. So I was always lucky, I guess you could call it that, where I had the time to train and get all the technique and, but again, I came up in a different time, a different structure. I never went to a class like you guys did. So I really had an advantage because my training was 100% geared for me. I was
Right.
lucky that way, right? As opposed to like what you just said, you may show up at a class and it's not anything you're interested in, or it's not any techniques you care to develop or need to develop. So I was, kind of blessed with that.
Right.
But
I mean,
Javier, you're an inspiration to a lot of people. You should be. And I can remember, I don't want to get too personal with stuff, but I can remember everything that we went through in our personal lives and professional lives, and to see you, remember you then and now, the change, all for the good. Everything's positive. But I mean, it's just, it's fascinating because, you're an enigma in a way, and for those people who don't really know too much about Javier, Javier used to be our, I don't know what you would call it, but if you think you're good at submissions, or you think you got this submission down, come here, Javier, put it on Javier. And it almost invariably they failed because Javier is very flexible, but he's also very astute. And so when people, I mean, so he was like the test. If you could literally tap him out. Now, this isn't live rolling. This is just, demonstrating. If you could get Javier to say, yeah, okay, that was wonderful. Now times may be different because your body's all beat up now, but you were remarkable. And that was we've had some interesting encounters through the years, man. Too bad Brian Deneve wasn't on tonight too, because he's been part of some pretty interesting things that nobody in the world knows that we've been through. But great to
It's
see
funny.
you, man. That's for sure.
It's funny because I was actually recently on a podcast, and the guys, really wanted to get into like my personal training history and background and whatnot. And Brian is one of the, is a very key selling point in my catch wrestling journey, because if I hadn't showed up at the gym and Brian wasn't there to just murder me and convince me I'm like, oh, this is the place to be, who knows? Yeah, I mean, maybe you would have done it, but in my mind, it would have been so easy to be like, well, of course he can beat the shit out of me.
Yeah.
He's the coach and he's a huge dude. Brian was definitely bigger than me, but like, at that point in my career, I didn't really know that much grappling, and I had gotten by on the little bit of stuff that I knew, and just being kind of like a tough, squirmy, scrappy dude with a little bit of wrestling knowledge. And back then that was, the overall level of grappling in the general Chicagoland area was pretty low. So that was more than enough. And I'd been to schools where I was like, I'm not impressed, like I don't want to be here. These guys don't seem very good. Or sometimes they actually were pretty darn good, but it wasn't the vibe that I was looking for. But then I just remember the first time I showed up to the tool and die shop, you had me roll with Brian like right away. And Brian tapped me out with like a heel hook. And I honestly cannot remember. In my mind, it was either 15 seconds or 50 seconds. I don't remember what you said, but it was something like that. And I was just like, whatever it was under a minute. And I was like, okay, this is the place to be. Nobody that I had rolled with at that point had so utterly and quickly dominated me. I'd rolled with guys that were bigger and more skilled than me, and whatnot, that, could beat me eventually. But yeah, he just shut down everything I wanted to do. I thought I knew a little bit about leg locks, not very much, but a little bit. And the ease with which he leg locked me was just like, okay, yeah, I want to be here.
Yeah, and what was nice about Brian, he was relatively new too, because he just started training with me. He never did this before, and then he moved to Chicago to train. And you came around not all that long afterwards, which really is a good thing, because it showed you, or at least I would hope it would have showed you, that you can make progression quickly when you put your mind to it. And we had, again, we didn't have a classroom setup. That was individual pretty much. But there was like 3-4 guys. But Brian is like Eric Paulson to this day still talks about Brian, and how impressed he was with him and whatnot. But you're right though about if I would have gotten on the mat, because I've gone through that through the years. Oh, Tony's just a big guy. He stretches you, he hurts you. Hey man, look. So what do you want? Who do you want? A guy that's only had 2 weeks of training and you blow through him? So yeah, if Javier or if Brian wasn't there, I would have had to done it. I would have you had to do it with me.
Right.
So I'm glad that Brian was there. Brian snuffed a few guys through the years like that. They came in and, they had all this pedigree, and, and that's just, I mean, but you were the same way. You snuffed guys too that had a list of accomplishments and achievements.
It's definitely weird seeing the arts change over time. Like the things that guys definitely used to say back in that era that have proven to be untrue. The way styles have changed over time as they absorb more stuff from outside influences and experiment with things that they were unwilling to do back then. Because I was definitely like, locally, like one of the Chicago guys, where guys didn't want to roll with me eventually because I did mostly leg locks and a lot of neck cranks that guys weren't comfortable with. And now, like, I don't want to say every gym that I go to, because that's definitely not true, but there's quite a few gyms in the area where, you know, you go with the right guys, or just the overall vibe of the gym, and that's totally okay. Like, guys come, even before I got there, guys come to Dennis's school in Hanover Park, and like they're gonna go against guys that are pretty good leg lockers that are just, you know, white and blue belts, you know, relative beginners. But you go to other gyms and it's still very traditional. You know, we don't teach that stuff until brown belt, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Well, you know, I was on that note, one of the negatives, and this is because people who are in positions of power to media or whatever, they always used to say shit about like, oh, catch wrestling, funky, crazy, off the wall submissions. And you know, the sad part about that is that kind of took root, and it's so not true, not, at least not what I teach, and you know that. However,
Right.
so many others that call themselves catch wrestlers, that's what they do. These like off the wall submissions that rarely work. And I was just discussing this with somebody today, and it's not about the submissions will never fail. The submissions are there. It's just the controlling aspect. And Paulson hit on this, that I taught you guys, you guys learned wrestling, okay, not just submissions, okay.
Mhm.
Wrestling, how to wrestle from move to move and pin and ride hard and move the right way. And that's why your submissions were always all you guys were successful. It wasn't just the submission, it was the controlling aspect of it and how to move and chain it the right way.
The chain wrestling,
Huh?
the chain wrestling in particular, I think is one of the most important things. Like, not to belittle anything that we did, because the conditioning was important both on a physical level and even more so in some ways on a mental level. And obviously the rigorous training in just wrestling technique was vital. But the mentality of understanding the difference between like when you should continue to pursue something versus when you should change into something else, how to, you know, in it's so common in most martial arts to have like an idea of understanding like the push pull, sort of using your opponent's power and strength against them, redirecting, all that kind of stuff. Like, that's using those terms. I could be talking about Aikido or Judo or Tai Chi or Kung Fu or karate. Like, they all use those terms. But I felt like a lot of the chain wrestling that we did really brought that to the forefront, where it was like, okay, I'm encountering too much resistance here. Can I do something to either reduce the resistance through superior leverage, positioning, or a rip, or can I transition to something else because he's given me the energy that would feed into some easier path over here?
Yeah, and the thing about that, well, we chain differently too, but getting on to just the word chain, it's a very personal experience, meaning everyone brings their own personality into that, their own style. So let's say you and I were wrestling the same person, exact same way. You may decide to go to a chain, move around at a different point in time than I would, because there's so many variables. You know, I'm almost like, let's say, a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier. So I'm going to get a different reaction out of the guy than you would. And this is something that has to be, I don't know if it can be taught in a direct sense. You have to have exposure to it, and then you have to kind of absorb it by watching and say, okay, I can see how that will apply to me and in my personality. So here, good classic example, you brought up leg locks, and that's really what you're great at. I mean, I'm not saying, let me strike that. It doesn't mean like you suck at everything else. It's always, when I think of you, I think of leg locks. You're built for that. You're great at that. You have a desire for that, and that's awesome. Whereas somebody else, because of their build or because of just their thought process, you know, you mentioned guys with the brown belt, you know, they don't learn, let's say, leg locks until the brown belt. So they may know leg locks, but they'll never be like, more than likely in general, won't be like, okay, this is their move. Because they spent years not doing it. You came into that gym right away when I met you 20 years ago. with the leg lock mentality, which was great. I liked it because, I was a leg lock. I love leg lock. So you and I clicked on that. And that's why Brian was able to do the leg lock on you, because I love leg locks, and I showed Brian the leg locks almost from the get-go. So my point
But
is,
yeah,
well,
no,
I'm rambling, but just,
I was going to say, like, a perfect example is, Martin and I were training partners for years, and we had completely different styles because you had catered the training around body type, and to a certain degree, I would say also our personalities.
Yeah.
Martin had longer limbs, so he was good at head scissors, body scissors, triangles, things of that nature. He would definitely he got very good at defending a lot of my leg locks because we were sparring constantly together, but he was less prone, at least in those days. I don't know how things might have changed, but he was definitely prone to avoid and shut down my leg locks, not necessarily like try to counter leg lock me back and try to get to his better situations where he knew he could be stronger, better. So yeah, a lot of that was like, it was body type dependent. Like I said, personality. I tended to be, pretty aggressive and a fast scrambler. Martin
yeah.
was a little bit more methodical. So yeah, it's just
well,
different
you
games.
know, we can have him back on, or I train him every week on Zoom, so I can, but I remember him. So I'll clarify what I'm about to say. If I'm wrong, I'll come back next week. But I remember Martin telling me, more than once, he had a complete different expectation than you. You wanted to be a snuffer. I mean, that's just what you wanted to be able to slaughter everybody. Martin's thing was truly, hey, I just don't want to get hurt. I want to be able to defend myself. I want to be able to stop stuff. So you're right. He was methodical. He was more defensive oriented. And I think now his whole mentality has changed. But back then, yeah. So with Martin, it was more how to shut these submissions down. Some of my proudest moments in my career, I guess you could say, was when we had heavyweight. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but heavyweight professional fighters that have, one in particular that fought all over the world, could not submit Martin. All right. And they rolled for a long time and never tapped him out, never tapped Martin out. Of course, this guy was never threatened because Martin wasn't, going after it. So this guy pretty much had his way. And he couldn't get Martin. And I don't know if you were there for that, but that was at Triton. Okay. We can discuss this afterwards, but yeah, it was, I was very proud of Martin. And I think that was the light bulb with Martin, where he probably finally felt, at least in the grappling realm, he reached where he wanted to go. He got to where he wanted to be. Okay. Where
Right.
big dudes, strong, tough, know-it-all guys couldn't get him. So, that was a good moment for me because, you guys too were all like part-timers because you all had jobs and family. Well, Martin didn't have a family, but you had families and you had terrible injuries, that trampoline accident set you back and, things like that. And we all had personal drama, or I had issues, everybody, so you guys did the most with what we had. And I'm really proud of that.
To this day, people that, everyone that rolls with me, most of the time these days, I'm in jiu-jitsu academies where we don't have shoes on. So they see the scar on my ankle and everyone just assumes that, like, oh, he's the leg lock guy. He must've gotten hurt with a leg lock. And then I tell them, I'm like, no, that scar's from surgery, from a trampoline accident.
Yeah, right.
It's like the most ridiculous thing.
Well, you really shouldn't wrestle on a trampoline. That's a mistake.
Listen, you have your fun the way you want, and I'll have my fun the way I want.
Well, Javier, people know, again, it's a little background on Javier. He was a gymnastics as well. So he's, always, so that's another one of his things. But everybody has their own take on things as well. The way, like, for example, neither one of you guys were ever lifters like I was. I just wanted, and a part of that, that Rodvan, of course, is the reason I wanted. always admired strength because I was such a tiny, skinny kid, but tapping into him, one of the strongest, I mean, he did things that I've never seen anybody do. Okay. He was so freaking strong. And so I'm like, wow, I got the pinnacle of strength here. And it just like festered in me to get strong. Now I didn't have access to weights. I never got big, but I got about as strong as I could with what I had. Right. But yeah, so everybody's different. Like you got the
Right.
extreme flexibility. You spent more time doing those exercises than I did. I was more into doing specific exercises of flexibility for wrestling abilities. But that's the thing. You can't squash somebody's what they bring to the table unless what they're bringing to the table is harmful to them, you know. So
Right.
all of you guys were just, there's no carbon copies. I mean, each one of you I can think of, Brian was different than you. You were different than Martin. You know, Martin was different than Dave, and all these other. Everybody was, you know, just the list goes on.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like I've got a couple of students that, you know, are pretty serious about this stuff. And between the guys I'm thinking of right now, there's like two of them that I always know that one of the guys, because he's like a heavyweight version of me, he's like very flexible. He's quite athletic. He's already got a good existing wrestling background. So I just kind of know that I'm like, I can take this technique that I like to do and I could just show it to him and it'll probably fit right in his game. But as a bigger guy, I don't want to say there's a limit to it, but he's unlikely to do certain other things. A lot of the stuff that I do that's a little bit more athletic and acrobatic, I know he's probably not going to try for it. You know, the risk reward ratio is a little bit different. But then I have this one kid who's lighter. He's already quite athletic, and he just loves doing he loves doing like head springs and cartwheels and things like that. And he finds ways to integrate that in. So I know, like, basically between those two, on average, most of the stuff that I like to do, one, the other, or both of them, I can just slot it in and I'd be like, I'll show it to them once and be like, okay, I see how that works. And they'll get it right away. But they're really exceptional in that way. With the vast majority of my students, I have to do exactly what you did, where it's like, okay, this guy's going to be a slow, grindy sort of fighter. This guy's really explosive. We have to take advantage of that. This guy over here, overthinks everything. Let's get him out of his head. This guy's shaped totally different from me. So he's going to have a different set of preferences and attributes than I can bring to the table. And that's been, like I said, I've been doing, I've been coaching for a while now, but like this is, full-time coaching is a different experience in a lot of ways. And I don't think people realize just how much effort should be put into it if you're going to do it right, obviously.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. In my case with you guys, you and I had vast physical differences. You and I clicked, so you click with me and I mentally, like how to move, the science behind it. Brian wrestled in certain ways a lot like me, and Costa wrestled in the other ways that Brian didn't wrestle.
Right.
Costa kind of wrestled like me. So the three of you, if we could blend them all to make one person, would probably be the way, at least came close to the way I wrestled. And the negative, the sad thing with Costa, when I was working with him, he had that bad back. Costa's training was so inconsistent because of his back injury.
Right.
But boy, when he felt good, he'll double wrist lock you. He was just a stud. And of course, Brian, and and then you brought, again, I think you saw the picture. I think you got into my psyche more. I think you knew me. Let's put it this way. You knew me better than anybody did. Okay. And not just I don't mean it even personally. I mean, you kind of knew how I moved or what I was going to do next when you saw me do stuff. You kind of already knew where I was going. So that's spooky. Okay. But that's good.
Right. I mean, honestly, like a lot of people talk about my flexibility and whatnot, but in the grand scheme of things, as a smaller athlete, I wasn't actually that fast. Like a lot of guys were far more explosive than me at my weight class. And while sure, when I came to you, I was not in good shape, but eventually through the training, I got in better and better shape and started getting some real cardio and developing some strength. But like, I've never been weak per se, but I definitely went through periods of time where it's like, oh, there's a vast differences in strength. But at the end of the day, even at the peak of my strength training, I also wasn't that strong of a person because, I'm 5'3", 138 pounds walking around, like there's practical limits to how strong I am when I'm wrestling against guys that are, 220 plus. So like the big thing for me was like, I'm not strong. I'm just not weak, and I'm not fast. I'm just faster than a lot of people because, they're slow. So like my main thing, survival above and beyond, yes, I was, like I said, scrappy and flexible, but I just had to like try and intellectualize it more and figure out, how to approach things in smarter ways. I couldn't afford to be, reliant on speed because I wasn't fast, not again, in my weight class. I was definitely faster than a lot of guys that were bigger than me and slow, but, and I wasn't strong compared to most of the guys, even guys in my weight class. So yeah, that was it. At the end of the day, a lot of it really did come down to just being smart and, being pretty persistent too.
And
You-
being
Oh,
not just persistent, but what's the word? Perception. A lot of guys couldn't submit you because I watched intently because you instinctively you knew the science of how to counter these things quickly. I think a lot of people wait too long. They get caught and now you're like the point of no return. Okay, it's too late now. The counters aren't going to work. You're a little slow on the uptake. And you were always quick on the uptake. You're difficult to tap for a lot of people. And that's again, these are all positives. This is what other people should strive for. And I'm glad you brought up what you just said about your size and your strength and your speed, because another rap that we get is that, oh, we're super athletes. Everybody's super athletic. And that's just not the case. Yeah, Martin worked up his conditioning. He was phenomenal. But yeah, he wasn't.
I got to interject there because while we are not super athletes in like none of the guys that were at the gym were going to like turn out to be like NFL prospects or anything like that. Like when we're talking about like real skilled high level athletes, we're talking about like a different level of human beings. But because of the way the training was, both the intensity and the inclusion of a lot of strength and conditioning and supplemental cardio, there were definitely times where our guys training part-time were conditioned better, had better strength in certain end ranges of motion, were just overall, it was I think that this is changing with time, but it is not uncommon. It's probably going to sound like I'm shit talking jujitsu in particular, but I will say this about, it's not uncommon for many martial arts clubs, regardless of style, to sort of cater to the lowest common denominator in some way. Because at the end of the day, if you've got, let's say you got 100 students, just for an easy, large, but round number, okay, you're probably not going to convince 100 students that are showing up for martial arts that they also need to do strength and conditioning, they need to do road work, they need to jump rope. You might convince a portion of them, and if you build the correct gym environment, you might even convince a fairly large number of them. But there's plenty of guys that are going to show up and they're like, I just want to do jujitsu. I just got off work. I don't want to lift weights. I don't want to run the treadmill. I don't want to do all this stuff. And it's like, okay, with certain select athletes, you can push them. And we were simply never given a chance to say no. Like,
Yeah.
It wasn't like I could be like, Tony, listen, I'm the paying customer here, and I don't want to come to you for strength training and cardio training and conditioning. I just want to learn takedowns and submissions. But once you're running, a conventional gym, you kind of have to cater to that to a degree. And you can certainly offer those services, and a lot of good gyms do. they have guys that are experts in strength and conditioning or whatnot. But yeah, I find that it's oftentimes not the norm for many schools. And again, this is regardless of martial arts style. We could be talking about kung fu, or we could be talking about karate, or we could be talking about, jujitsu and judo. It's very common for many schools to not offer that as a direct thing and be like, if you want to do that, go get a fitness membership or go,
Yeah.
so they're not necessarily conditioning the body to perform in the best way. So like, if you go to a school and you've got a guy who's like a seriously well-conditioned athlete, because it's just part of the program, which it absolutely was for us, that
Sure.
guy probably seems like a super athlete to a guy who's like, well, I just got off my job and I don't do any supplemental cardio. And, I get winded after 2 rounds. So yeah,
Well,
it's,
you nailed it, but I think I may have misspoke with it. Like, people saw me do the lost art of hooking. I was big, I was strong, and that's
well,
kind
yeah.
of the impression he got. You know that we used to
And
fight that on.
yeah, you were absolutely the face of it. And there were also
Yeah.
plenty of other guys that, were calling themselves catch wrestlers appropriately or not, that sort of fit that bill. Like I was definitely the oddity in that there weren't that many guys that were advocates of the style that were around my size at the time. And they're, if we look at the era, like most of the guys were bigger dudes. So it's easy to get that impression that, like it's a big guy art when
Yeah.
one of the guys showing it is this big muscular dude.
Well, that's unfortunate because it's, and it's not the case. And, once again, I told somebody a few months ago, it actually was a woman who, was having problems. Oh, I'm too small. I'm like, look it. And I had to watch how I said this but I said, you're bigger than I was when I learned this shit. Okay. I was like 110 pounds.
Right.
All
And
right.
you were also like, you're still technically a child. You were like 13.
Yeah. And I was 5'6". Technically, when I started, I was probably 5'5", but
A giant.
9 months later, when I charted it, I was 5'6", 117. So I wasn't even that big when I was smaller than that when I started. So for the first whole year, at the end of my first year of training, I was 5'6" and 117 pounds. So I put one whole year of brutality. Yeah, as a child and as a small child, not a big child.
Right.
And when I graduated high school, I was 178. Okay, when I was done with my training, I weighed 178 pounds. Okay, so
Right.
I'm Martin size. I wasn't always like this, but the beauty of it was, for me now personally, because I was a sprinter, I had that fast twitch stuff, and so I always wrestled as a fast middleweight or however you want to label it, and even when I got bigger, I still wrestled fast. I never changed. So I was kind of lucky. Whereas some kids are grown, they're like heavyweights in high school, so they wrestle as a heavyweight the rest of their life. I was lucky that I didn't. And so I could relate to you guys, even though I was
Right.
100 pounds heavier.
You remembered what it was like.
I wasn't. Yeah, right. I knew exactly what it was like. I mean,
It's a weird observation that I've made, coming up through various sports, but now sometimes it's just because dudes start young, I think, like quite young sometimes, but it's like, if I see a guy who's a heavyweight who started kind of later in life when he was already at his pretty much full size or near to it, they almost always move differently than a guy who was like a kid who grew up training with like bigger dudes and knows what it's like to be the small guy and have to rely on speed and guile. And like, it's been like, I know some guys that are like 240 plus that are very tall, very powerfully built guys, but I knew them when they were 140, 150 pound kids, my size. And we used to go back and forth, but I had like man strength and years of experience. And now it's like they're 100 pounds of muscle. They still move incredibly fast. They're still, very graceful relative to the heavyweight ideal, that people have in their mind of like, slow and methodical. And yeah, those guys are terrifying. But again, it's because they they weren't always that size. They learned to move during their primary learning phase when they were much smaller. And I think that really helps them retain that edge a lot of times. There's quite a few
That's
guys
good.
that I've seen that are like that.
Yeah, I got to agree because I know that was the case with me. And yeah, I've seen others too that as long as they maintain their interest in working out. Yeah, 100%. Joe, you got input?
Oh man, it's a funny thing with you two guys going. It's like I have all these things I want to ask, and then we move on. I'm like,
Well,
I
just
don't want to. I
Because
don't
we
want
don't
to go
shut up.
back. No, it's because I don't want to interrupt you either, because you guys have such great stuff. On the most current point, and I think I've kind of tried to ask this question before to you, Tony, but the idea of kind of riffing on what you guys were saying, like, do you think in some ways your scenario with Rodvan was almost kind of ideal for anybody obviously not everybody can start as a kid. So, I mean, some of it's fate and things like that, but just in like I said, an idealized circumstance. I mean, you had speed and things like that, but here you had literally one of the strongest men in the world, and you were a small child,
Yeah.
or just like a not small child, but like, a small adolescent or teenager. So you could not beat him on any. So day one for wrestling for you is being crushed and destroyed, and you're going up against, like, to me, would be running into a brick wall kind of a thing. If that's where you're starting at, like, for the rest of your grappling career, no one's ever going to have that kind of strength advantage over you. Even if you come up against, like, because I think Brian Klaus was a world-class power lifter, but it
Sure
must
was.
have still not felt as overwhelming as it must have felt as a kid having the brute that was, Stanley Rodvan putting, like, once you survive that, everything else has got to seem relative, like you're prepared for anything at that point.
Yeah, it's a walk in the park. Yeah.
And so,
I mean-
like, to me, it's almost like if you can start young enough before you have the physical attributes and work against guys, most kids, like, and I don't know how it works for most wrestling teams. They probably pair up kids about the same size. I don't know how often they spend with people who are just ridiculously bigger than them. But is that, that seems to maybe that sets you up for kind of like insane success, because but I still am trying to imagine how, like, you as a kid were able to put a top wrist lock on this guy, with his strength. Like, that to me boggles the mind, that at that point, if you're able to pull that off, no one's going to be able to stop. No one else on the, is going to be able to stop your top wrist lock if you can pull it off on a guy who has that much strength advantage on you. And
Well,
so
the other thing
Go ahead.
that you gotta, well, at least with me, is it was mind blowing to me to know that here's a guy that's damn near 60 years older than me that can beat the living shit out of me, at will. I mean, you think of old time, oh, these old men, they're no good. I mean, they're old. Here's a guy that was like 55 years older than me. And I couldn't do anything to the guy. Okay. Watching any karate movies or kung fu movies isn't going to help. My boxing, wasn't going to deal with it, at that point in time. So yeah, that was humbling. As far as what you just said about tapping him out with a top wrist lock or something, that is all that's because the way we do it, my school, what I taught Javier and guys like you, with the twists and the perfect technique, where that's the only way that it could have been done. I don't know. There's no other person that would have been able to do that. Because I know how the other guys do their submissions. It's not going to work. Okay. And Javier is a classic example too. When people put the submission holds on, let's call it the traditional way, Javier 99.99% of the time gets out of them. Putting on our way, he doesn't. None of us do. And Javier can put me in it, and I'm not getting out. That is the science that I learned about from Rodvan. On this is the way it has to be. You got to get the twists. You got to get the elbows in, or whatever the scenarios. Use your body weight and shit. But remember something. This is again, I had an advantage that nobody that ever lived had the same advantage. Rodvan, being an actual professional strongman, okay, knew everything there was to know about leverage. Okay, bending those bars and bending coins is more than just strength. It's knowing horseshoes and all the shit he did. It's about leverage. and he taught me the science and the secrets of leverage. Okay. There's other strong men, obviously, that know how to leverage, but they don't know how to fight like this. So I was it's just luck, pure freaking luck. Yeah, I don't fear anybody like I told you many times. He said, the worst beatings you're ever going to get are going to be here in the gym, or wasn't a gym, but in his house, yeah. And there's some great guys that I've met through the years, like Brian Klaus, one of the nicest human beings, knowledgeable. You're right, world-class power lifter and shit. I just wish all of you guys had the opportunity to felt Radvan. There was something coming off of him, like an aura. There was freaky. Some of the stuff they say is exaggerated, but not a lot of it. All right. He did shit that I don't even want to say because people will say it's ridiculous. No, he could do things that it was rough. It was a hard training, man. It was rough. I'm glad I came out of it in one piece.
And I wanted to make another comment, just an observation. I'm still surprised that when people watch your videos and they say, well, you're strong, that's why you're pulling it off. It still kind of shocks me, because I feel like then they must just not be listening. Because literally, to your point, you're explaining the leverage and the anatomy behind what you're doing. It's not like you're just muscling through and showing people tapping out. You're very carefully explaining, and it's not even, like I said, it's based on some basic, understanding of mechanics and stuff. I'm reaching at the end point of the lever here. I'm using a very small point here to increase the pressure, the pounds per square inch. So it's you lay it all out. So if they're listening, they understand maybe they can't do it at your level, but they should be picking up tips on how to improve it for themselves. Like I said, so that it's just almost like maybe they're not paying careful enough attention to the instruction to see those details. That's my impression, because I'm just shocked when I hear that it's, or it's maybe it's just people who just want to dismiss it, like they don't want to, I don't know but it's just surprising, because I think a lot of people following the show, as they first come into contact from the videos and the instruction there, and I think it reaches a lot of people, and they get the quality and the details that you're giving. So it's surprising that they might just be people trying to dismiss it, but I
don't really think it's probably not deliberate most of the time. Some people, it's obviously deliberate. They whether they have a deliberate agenda or whether they just have a built-up bias. But I think most people in that situation are going to make excuses like that. And I don't know that it's necessarily like Tony's a good example, but he's also, it's a very special case because he's one of the few guys showing this stuff. So there's no counter example. Let's just say this, like, if I was the one who filmed The Lost Art of Hooking, we would be getting very, very different criticisms, even if the content was identical. Okay. People would not be like, oh, well, it's just because he's so strong, because I'm a little person. Okay. But that doesn't mean there would be no criticisms. People would still be like, oh, well, this doesn't work for this reason or that reason. I think people are a little bit more prone, and this is just like a very natural bias that people have to get past. They're a little bit more prone to say things like, oh, he's only able to do that because he's big and strong, because that's a very easy thing to just over focus on. Whereas people are a little less likely to say that kind of stuff about less material aspects. Like if somebody's only able to do something because they're incredibly fast or they have insane reflexes and good hand-eye coordination, people are a little less prone to deduce that immediately. They'll give it a try and be like, I don't have the coordination to do that, after actually trying it, or trying a lot of times and failing. But yeah, like, strength is just such an easy thing to visibly see. Size is an easy thing to just eyeball and get over concerned about.
But I think you're right. I think bias plays into it a little bit. Like, if you're not receptive to learning, which is hard. I think we all have biases and we come from backgrounds and something has worked from you before. And if someone says, well, hey, have you tried this different approach? It's not easy to do that. It's not easy to switch something that you've been, you've invested in, time, money, and a lot of your emotional. So there might be resistance to even hearing the details, so that you just glom on to whatever. And you're right.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the mentality you're coming into it with. But I'll give an example from my own personal experience. Don't get me wrong, it's not that I didn't believe my coaches, but the majority of my coaches in judo, wrestling, jujitsu, doesn't really matter. Most of them are significantly larger than me. It took quite a few years before I started working with any kind of coaches who were around my size. Even then, they're mostly bigger than me. But the difference between working with a guy who's, say, 220 versus the working with a guy who's like 150 pounds when you're my size is pretty dramatic. So yeah, like if Tony told me like, okay, you pin him in this way and you're just going to crush his soul, like it would be very easy for me to go, well, of course you can do that. You outweigh that person, So yes, I know there's a technique for it, but obviously the technique is so much more magnified because you're also bigger. And then I would try and do it. And if I didn't get the technique right, it would be very easy for me to go, well, it's not working as well for me because I'm small. But then you see somebody who's, my size or closer to my size do kind of the same thing. You're like, oh, okay, well, it's not just because I was small. It was obviously because I didn't put enough work into it. I sucked at it. I missed an important detail. And so you can have that kind of experience. Like I'll use this as an example because I think it's a pretty easy one. If your only impression of like the crushing pressure of a good pin comes from somebody who is significantly larger than you, I think you'll overly attribute why it sucks so much to be down there on their size. But then if you experience somebody who's your size or heaven forbid smaller that has good pinning technique and is just crushing the life out of you, you can't draw a breath, suddenly you're like, oh, it wasn't the size, it was definitely the technique, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. That's a very
It
good
does,
point.
because I had a guy once at a seminar, oh, your shit don't work. The dude wasn't even in the ballpark of doing the hold right, okay?
Right.
He just wasn't even close. He copped an attitude, cocky. It was, I didn't get mad at the guy. I actually felt bad, he running his mouth, but you weren't even close to doing it right. But getting back to what Joe was saying, another problem for me is people want to get entertained. They want to watch something that's entertaining. All these flying arm bars and fancy moves, that's awesome to watch and shit. I'm more like the old physics professor, right? Where I'm teaching you the science of all of this, nut and bolt, right down to the, nitty gritty. Some people, you're right, Joe, may not have the attention span, may not want to be in it. Maybe you're just watching and not really listening. And yeah, so it gets lost. But see, that's kind of how I learned from Rodvan, although Rodvan did not have a great command of English. And I'm more detail oriented, meaning like he didn't have the patience to really like, I'm more detail oriented. I'll explain stuff when I'm interested. If I'm not really turned on by you, I'll just say, okay, but yeah, I think what cemented that for me as a coach or as a teacher was my music, which came after my my fighting training was my music. And that gave me the structure, okay, and the cohesiveness of, okay, this is how it's got to be. It's all math. And I do agree completely with what Javier said about size and either a big guy could do something or a small guy could be so quick, and you automatically relate that, well, that's because he's big or that's because he was small. Javier can get on the legs because he's right there, he's smaller. No, I mean, Javier would have gotten on the legs if he was 6 foot tall because he had the discipline and the desire to do it, to learn how these techniques work. Yeah, but now if he's benching 500 and he weighs 400, that's not that impressive. But if he's benching 500 and he's 175 pounds, yeah, well, okay, now that's that's a whole different thing. But you mentioned attributes, and I think Roy Jones Jr. is one of the greatest cases of a guy who was one of my favorite boxers, but I knew back then he wasn't a boxer. Okay. He
Right.
didn't do the fundamentals. You know, he had such tremendous reflexes and this and that. And once those started to go, people were teeing off on him and shit. Because he could no longer just rely on his unbelievable reflexes. I don't know if I've ever seen it. Floyd Mayweather's close, but man, God. But you know, boy, these guys, you know, so I never had that kind of a thing. You know, I may have been fast, but I never had that. That guy, that's super athlete to me, what he was able with his reflexes. I had to make sure that I was always in the right place at the right time to save my ass. So I do honestly believe that the fundamentals are lacking from my world. Now, your world, Javier, may be different because I know you'll teach the fundamentals, but I see so many guys just doing simple things, footwork, you know, angles, and that's not funny. That's not fun stuff to learn. It's kind of monotonous and boring. And like, what's the point? Like music, doing your scales. What's the point? I want to play songs. Man, if you do your scales, you'll play those songs so much better when it's time to play the songs. Same with fighting. If you do your fundamentals, so much better once you're fighting because you got those fundamentals and the guy can't tee off on you. You know, that's just my belief. That's my take. But I came again in an era where it was kids are seen and not heard. You don't ask questions. You just, you know, you just you listen and you do whatever they tell you to do. And I think other martial arts schools in my day were like that probably, but they were not. They were teaching this bullshit, you know, the stuff. I'm not talking world-class martial artists here. I'm just talking, you know, Johnny come lately martial arts schools. They were cropping up everywhere in the 70s. I heard around the country, you know, but what are you learning? You know, but I think anybody who's going to train under you is going to learn as far as the grappling stuff goes, as good as it gets. You know, you're going to learn as good as it gets technique. So it's a blessing to have you around, you know.
Thanks. I mean, I think it's interesting because, you know, I've taught at this point hundreds, if not thousands of people from various degrees of experience and backgrounds. And I talk to them a lot of times, you know, once I either as the initial introduction to them, where it's just like, hey, how's it going? How'd you hear about us type stuff at whatever gym I might be working at a time. Or, you know, in longer discussions as I get to know them. And, you know, everyone comes into this for different reasons. And it's a pretty rare day where somebody's like, well, you know, I came into your gym because you posted this video on Instagram of this amazingly flashy technique. And I was just like, I have to train there. Like, in fact, I can think of one time where something like that was said to me. And it wasn't even that we had posted a flashy technique per se. And that was what convinced them. They were just like, oh, I'm looking for this thing. And in my search, I found this. And this stuck out in my memory. So like they were already looking for martial arts, and it's just like that flashy thing, you know, was what kind of, you know, that's what drew them in finally. But for the most part, like most people that do this stuff, they're not coming in as very good athletes. They probably fall into the category where they want to do it for self-defense reasons, or they want to do it to get into shape. Okay. Occasionally you're going to come across somebody who's really just doing it for like the love of martial arts and the journey. And then the rare individual is like, I want to be a world champion or something along those lines. You know, even in gyms with sports that are pretty competitive, the overwhelming majority of people aren't competitors. You know, I can go down the street to the local kickboxing gym, and they've got tons of students that have never fought and will never fight because they're not in it for that. They want to get their cardio. They want to learn a martial art so they can defend themselves. So like, I totally understand the mentality that a lot of people have where they're like, we have to draw them in with this cool, flashy stuff. And that stuff gets a lot of likes on social media and draws a lot of attention. but I haven't honestly seen that many cases in all my years of doing this where people are like, I want to do that crazy thing that that little acrobat ninja did, because most people don't fit that description.
Yeah.
But again, it does get attention, and sometimes you gotta trick people into doing the hard work with the promise of something cool. I tell my students all the time, if I and it's weird because, in fact, I got a question for you to see if you remember something. I was talking about it to one of my guys, and I was like, man, I think I messed up the details, but the essence of the story was correct, so it's okay. But again, like the way you ran things, like we didn't know on any given day what we were going to be learning. That was decided by you. We didn't know how much strength and conditioning was going to be required to do it. We might go a week where all we did was, body weight exercises and cardio, followed by, like sprawls and shots, followed by, maybe some live rounds at the end, depending on who's there at the end of class. There are definitely times when we worked on stuff that wasn't submissions at all. And then there would be times where we'd hyper focus on the submission stuff because you felt that we had the other aspects down pat. But in a general sense, when I've got a class of 20 plus guys that are arguably there to learn how to do submissions from me, that's the cherry on top that they really want. I've got to trick them, because I can't go up to your average dude who, works a day job and does this stuff for fun and be like, before you can learn this leg lock or arm lock or choke or whatever, I'm going to need you to do 5,000 squats, because I need that level of conditioning from you so you can actually do this for real. They'd walk out, they'd be like, no, what are you talking about? You're crazy. But I could absolutely trick them into doing that over time. And I can trick them into doing fundamentals, lots and lots of reps of fundamentals, by showing the fundamental and then building it up to the next step and then building it up to the next step and the next step. So maybe I do like a series that works up over a sequence of an hour and a half or so, where they build up to something that's, I don't know, 6 moves deep, let's say. But the first part is the most important part, and they end up doing lots and lots and lots of reps. But if I told them to just do that for an hour and a half, they never would. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm. Well, my take on it was, we had a lot of fly by night guys, guys that didn't want to, they just passed through, they couldn't handle the training. But I was not a commercial gym. So
Right.
I would, you guys, well, I'll get to this in a second, but you guys were, I'm just hardcore. There was no, I mean, my background on how I got abused. So you guys put up with it. You guys were just strictly hardcore. You guys you can't, and you guys had the day jobs and shit, families, but you guys were just more serious than the example of the gentleman you mentioned now. However, how I was back then, how mean, like just riding you guys. I don't do that anymore, because there are no more hardcore guys that I run into in my circles.
They're out there.
Oh no, I know I said that I run into, okay. There may be hardcore guys out there, but they're not coming to me for training. Okay. So I've had to tone it down. I've had to be Mr. Nice Guy. And, I hold back from vomiting, because there's times when I don't want to be nice, because you don't deserve to be treated nicely, because you're lazy. You're joking around all the time and not taking the shit seriously. If you can't take it seriously, why should I? Okay. So that's how I look at it. You guys took the stuff seriously. Therefore, we were able to joke and poke fun at each other. And because I already knew deep down, you guys are serious as a heart attack. I miss those days where I could have these killers. I don't have anybody now. I don't train anybody really. So, I miss that. And I think that's why I've lost my desire as a coach, because I just wish I had you guys again, a group like you, but let's say much bigger, like 20 of you guys, would my last years of my life would be very happy. Talking about golden years, that would make my life golden if I just had a crew like that were on. But you asked me, okay, you said sometimes we did conditioning, sometimes because I got the energy of the group, okay? And you guys were so cohesive. It was so bizarre that like, if you were like falling behind on your conditioning, it just seemed like everybody else was too. You guys were always so much on the same page. So I'm like, okay, we got to focus on the conditioning a little bit. Let's get that up. And then, okay, now let's get on these submissions and, whatever. So I kind of went off of the energy that was in the school, or in the group here. I don't know if anybody ever had a better crew of guys than I did with you guys. You, Brian, Martin. I mean, things just got so much better when Joe quit coming, Did you notice that?
Absolutely true. Yeah.
Right. No, but seriously, I don't want to name names and embarrass people, but that we've had some guys come through that gym that was like, come on, they actually almost in a way held us back, kind of killed the momentum. But
and that's the rough thing. And like I was saying, that this is especially, it's very challenging running a commercial school and maintaining a hardcore edge without having and our main way of doing that is kind of to separate things out, unfortunately, where you can have specific training for the guys that are truly hardcore. But yeah, like there's that lowest common denominator aspect. And I think it's very easy to be like, well, I've got 2 guys in a group of 20 that want to train really hard, which means I got 18 guys that don't. Yeah. So I'll cater to the majority and the minority will suffer. But what we've kind of found, and, still working on perfecting this, it's a work in progress, is, more of the rising tide concept, where if we push everyone pretty hard, then the guys that can already handle it will simply handle it. And then the guys that can't handle it yet will see their success and be like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And they'll push harder to try and get there. You can't go too far because they'll be like, well, the only reason he could do it is because he's the better athlete and he's 20 years younger and this, that, and the other thing. The excuses start coming out. But yeah, again, striking the right balance is the biggest challenge, because you don't want to go so hard. Again, talking in a commercial sense, you don't want to go so hard that you're going to lose students over it, but you don't want to water things down so much that you're robbing the hardcore guys of what they should really be doing.
Yeah, well, we're coming from 2 different angles, because like I said, I didn't have a commercial gym. I didn't have 20 people. So right. If I did, yeah, things would have probably had to be different. But as far as watering shit down, that was my biggest pet peeve back then, when we'd have people come in from out of town, and I still get this to this day. It's like, no, Tony, I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm not allowed to do this, do this, do this. And well, why are you with me? Because then I can't, and I made a mistake by sometimes catering to them and like switching things or toning it down. So it wasn't the real shit. I mean, it wasn't the most effective way of doing it, because literally they were like, this is the only way we could do these moves. And there were just some moves that I just couldn't even go to, right. It wasn't even allowed. And just talking to Jason Bender yesterday, that still exists. There's still stuff, although he said it's getting better. There's still some stuff. So it's difficult for me to take a guy, let's just say jiu-jitsu or whatever it's ABC tournament, and show him some stuff. Well, I don't know the tournament. I don't know the rules. I don't know what's allowed, what's not allowed. It's difficult. And back then, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it was so like every little town had their own little tournament with their own special rules. It was like no right. way you could keep track.
That still exists to a degree today. One of these days I'm going to sit down with a pen and paper and actually go through and jot down the sheer number of styles and rule sets that I've competed under. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be an impressive list, probably. But even if we just count like jiu-jitsu tournaments, different styles and federations have different rules. Oftentimes they have similar rules, but even subtle changes to rules can have massive changes in the techniques that are allowed and the best way, the strategies that you use to win a given tournament. So, the way I approach it is I'll let the guys know when I teach something that is frequently illegal. Okay. Like I'll say, hey, you guys can't do this in most tournaments under these, you know, under these conditions. Or I'll be like, the only tournament you can get away with this in is this one, you know, or whatnot. And I'll preface it around that, so that I can still teach what I feel they need to know and what is the most appropriate thing, but so that they understand that if they're going to compete, they should not be doing that. And there's certain things that I'll teach that I'll be like, listen, I don't want you guys to do this to each other in regular sparring. This is too brutal. It has to be saved for strictly competition. And here's the tournaments where you can get away with that. So yeah, but that's from years of learning rule sets as a competitor,
Right.
because I was competing under those rules. And I find that like a lot of instructors, you know, because they know they're talking to an audience that isn't predominantly filled with competitors, they don't necessarily cater to that. They don't make sure that the students are aware of that. So the default rule set that most students operate under is whatever's a friendly role at the gym. And sometimes that is based, at least in part, on some rule set of competition, but sometimes it's just like, you know, whatever coach basically says it is. So, for example, I'll use a very noteworthy example here. So, heel hooks are forbidden in jujitsu in the gi. They are legal in many systems of no gi competition, although that depends on when they become legal. Okay, so like some tournaments, it's only legal once you're a brown belt or above in no gi. Other tournaments only requires 2 years of experience. Okay, I've absolutely trained in jujitsu gyms that would allow heel hooks in the gi during normal rolling. So whenever we would prepare those guys for competition, it became a reductive thing where it's like, hey, that thing that you're doing all the time in here, that's totally okay. You can't do that anymore. Okay, you have to take that out of your game for now for the sake of competition, which is the exact opposite of certain other gyms where it's like, oh, we don't normally do that here, but we've got competition coming up, so let's try to add this in the, you know, the weeks or months leading up to competition.
Well, I certainly remember a competition you were in that banned leg locks the day of the tournament, and
Yeah.
you, because of your training. No, I mean, this is not currently how you are, but maybe, but you know, yeah, you got penalized points because you kept instinctively going to those leg locks. And that's something that people have to remember. It's, you know, you may think, but under pressure, you know, under the stress of a tournament or a life and death situation, for me, Tony Cecchine only, I don't ever want to be bothered worrying about what I cannot do. Okay. Because then it takes the focus off of what I want to do shit. And in that case with this tournament, yeah, I mean, you were just instinctively, you know, going to those legs and it cost you. Because that sucks. But you know, for me, you're right. You're in the business, you're training a lot of these competitors. So it's great that you know all these rule sets. I don't need to know those because I train people few and far between, and the ones that I do train want to know how to kill people. You know, they're not worried about winning a trophy. So I don't have to worry about that. Now, if I was working out of your school, well, yeah, I'd have to spend a week or however long it takes studying the rules and watching some videos to see, you know, what you can get away with, what you can't. No reason for me to do that. But also though, you guys, when you trained with me, never got to learn the strikes because, man, we were back. This was back in everybody just wanted to grapple. I mean, you know, it's a shame. And not often did we work on strikes. Sometimes, but not much. And that was another thing that I wish we could have covered more of, you know, and nobody knows my whole system, you know that, because you didn't work the strikes and the weapons.
Right. I mean, yeah, I got a very small taste of it, but I also, not to just make excuses, but like one of the reasons I liked grappling and have always liked grappling is I have terrible eyesight. And once I make contact with somebody, that doesn't matter.
Right.
But just at the end of striking range, you know, like the distance that people, and again, I'm small. So like the distance that people can hit me versus the distance that I can hit them, you know, I always had to close range no matter what. And once I'm that close, people are grabbing me regardless.
Well,
Only really disciplined strikers wouldn't. So
remember, I gave you privates at my gym in Bentonville for boxing, so I can agree. You're better off grappling.
terrible.
No, I won't say terrible, but your heart wasn't in it. It was 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever. It was like really early. You were tired. It was like before you had to go to work, and yeah, it was. So it wasn't like the. But what's beautiful about all of this is that the martial arts in general, there's something for everybody. May not be grappling, may not be boxing. It might be kung fu for this guy, or taekwondo or hapkido. It doesn't matter, right? And I just don't. I would never want to snuff somebody's dream or goal. And I think a lot of people out there, especially years ago, were snuffing everybody. Oh, this sucks, that sucks, And then people were like that were on the internet are like, well, I better not take taekwondo or whatever the style. Wasn't necessarily taekwondo, but I don't want to take this style because they'll make fun of me, or it's ineffective. Bullshit. It's just like when I'm stuck going to a Planet Fitness because there's no other gyms around here. I'm not going to I'll never get super strong again working there, but nobody in there is going to be competing for Mr. Olympia. Okay. That's not what the gym's all about. They're just there to get in shape and a little bit and have fun. So
yeah, it was definitely, that was definitely a different era. There's still attitude like that plenty. But yeah, it was, man, I don't want to say that it ended, because there's still that element, but like the sense of challenge and like the winds of change from like the early UFCs and whatnot were pretty fresh in the air still. What the first UFC was, what, like 93, I think.
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
93.
And I started training with you in 99. So that was the thing at the time.
Yeah, I get it. No, I'm not knocking you. I get it. But yeah, I get it. I totally get it. And everybody that would come in from around the world or around the country to train, that's what they wanted. Submissions and all of that. I gave it to them, but I really wanted to do some other stuff, and you couldn't rip on most people because that was like, oh my God, they couldn't. Yeah, but you know what? It's just times change, but for me, I'm still going to do what I do. You're going to do what you do. And I remember a lot of times some of the stuff, the talks that I had with Lou Thez and exchanging moves and setups. And here was a guy that was 80 and I was in my 30s, and we were still exchanging ideas, but it wasn't foreign to either one of us. Okay. It wasn't like all of a sudden a crazy thing from another system that, we're just not going to absorb, because we had such strong beliefs in what we did and time tested and all of that. But yeah, I'm always like open-minded about stuff like that, but you have to also be prepared to get it shot down. So like when Lou would ask me to show him something, I knew full well I'm prepared for him to maybe be negative about it. Okay. And when he would show me stuff, he thought maybe Tony's going to be negative. It was just weird that we weren't negative. We both liked everything we would show each other all the time. But
right.
Yeah, because I've had guys say, hey, I saw this, this real special martial art famous guy do this move. And I always say, that's not a good move. Here, I'll show you how to counter it. But Joe saw me do this several times at Jason Bender's old place, where they catch a move, and I'm like, no. Yeah. But then again, I'll see something once in a while from someone that'll be like, I like that. Okay, that's actually good. That's a good one. So yeah, it's just, you gotta roll with it. You gotta accept the good with the bad.
So
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I made reference to this earlier, but I wanted to get back to it before I forget about it. So I'm gonna storytell for a moment here, and I need you to, if you can recall, to fill in the details and the numbers. Okay. Right. But let me see if you remember this day. And I'm pretty sure about these details, but it's been years. Maybe I'm misremembering it a little bit. So at the time, I believe Martin and I were the only super regular students. We still had guys coming in on like weekends, and guys would come in for trips and to Chicago and whatnot. But at this particular time, I think it was mostly just the two of us working out pretty regularly with you. And I remember, I'm pretty sure you brought us over to the Addison Park District, okay, at their new facility, which
Okay.
is right off like what is it, like
Lake Street and shit, yeah.
yeah, you know the one I'm talking about, okay.
Yeah.
And they had like a big indoor track, okay. And I didn't know what to expect that particular day, but you took us up there, and you had the little clicker to keep count of things. And you're like, okay, we're gonna do some conditioning. And I was like, oh, okay, great. My least favorite part of all of this, especially whenever I have to do conditioning with Martin, who had amazing cardio. So I'm like, oh God, is he gonna push what I'm doing, or is he gonna push what Martin's doing? Because those were at different levels at that point. So you had us, you had a sprint around the track, and then sometimes you would have us jog. I don't remember if it was like sprint, jog constantly. And then when we made it back to you after a sprint or after a jog, we would do a seemingly random number of squats and push-ups. And then as soon as we were done with that, it was like, okay, this is a sprint around the track. We'd go running around the track, and we get back, and there'd be no rest. And it would be like, okay, well, now you're back here, do your squats, do your push-ups. And then, okay, well, this is a jog. Go ahead and jog around the track. And, you jog around the track, and then you come back and you do some squats and push-ups. And, it wasn't like a set pattern. It wasn't like, okay, I need 20 push-ups and 10 squats, or it was just like seemingly like, it was always the same, like 10 and 10 or 5 and 5 or whatever. But I never knew what I was going to get. I might sprint down the track and come back to you and it'd be like 20 of something, or I might sprint down the track and come back to you and it'd be like 3. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this went on, and I was definitely convinced that you were going to kill me. Because my sprints got slower and slower, and the push-ups got harder and harder, and the jog around the track started becoming like a real fast walk. There'd be moments where I was at the other end of the track where you couldn't quite yell at me, and I'd be like, maybe I can hide behind this pillar briefly and catch my breath. But there was no hiding. And I want, like, here's where I start struggling with the actual numbers, because it's weird. I vaguely recall once we were done, you said, I don't remember, it was 55 minutes or an hour and 55 minutes, but I'm pretty sure 55 was in there. Like, that number is burned in my brain. And I'm pretty sure you had said it was either under an hour or under 2 hours. I just can't remember. And you're like, okay, you guys are done. And I'm like drenched in sweat. I'm dying. I just want to lay there. And do you remember the number of push-ups and squats that you made us do in between those laps?
Well,
The total number.
If you rewind this video, the minute you started that story, I went like this. You'll see this when you watch this. I went like this.
Uh-huh.
You did 1,000. You did.
Yep.
So it went 1. I knew where you were going with this. That's why I went like this. I had you beat. You did 1,000 squats and push-ups, not consecutively, but that was my goal with the clicker. And yeah, it was like 2 hours.
Okay, it was an hour 55, I think then.
It was hour 55, but it was only because I was pacing you with the squats and all of that jazz. Oh yeah, that was the magic number. Because
see, that's the thing.
That's a milestone.
It's a milestone, but it was also something that if you had told me going in there that day, Javier, today's the day you're doing 1,000 push-ups and 1,000 squats, I don't know that I would have done it. You had to trick me, and you had the coaching acumen to do so. Like, you knew what it was going to do, what it was going to take rather, for me to make that breakthrough and be like, oh, I can do this. And I could, like I said, I couldn't remember all the numbers involved. I was pretty confident, and I told the story right, fortunately.
I remember it because the 1,000 is the thing,
Right.
and that's why I did one of these numbers at the beginning of your story,
Mhm.
because I knew where you're going with this. Well, I didn't know until you got it a few seconds into it. I'm like, yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's okay. I don't want to just say it's just a number. But really in the end of the scheme of things, it is just a number. And the trick is, okay, so I did 1,000 squats today. Okay. Well, then let's make it, I did 1,000 squats this afternoon. Then it's like, I did 1,000 squats in a row. Okay. That's how you want to ultimately get it. Right. So the first part is your mind getting over that big hump of doing it. Now that doesn't mean I can take anybody off the street. I mean, you guys were already halfway decent in shape, but you guys were lagging in the squats and the push-ups a little bit, I think. Yeah, I'm glad you remembered that, because I'm glad you remember that, because that's an important milestone, man. That you could do it.
But that's what I was talking about before, like I can't go into a typical hour-long jujitsu class as a jujitsu coach and be like, okay, guys, we're going to do, 500 squats and 500 push-ups.
Yeah.
Most people aren't down for that. Okay. And B, I probably would need quite a bit of time building them up to it. And that's not a, like several of the guys that I'm thinking of right now probably could work their way up to it, just like we worked our way up to it. But that was something that we did. And I don't want to be like without question. There were definitely a few times in my youth where I snapped back at you about, like I can't do it, and because I felt like I couldn't, and you believed in me and pushed me and got me through those limitations. But yeah, like that's one of those things that was very different about our training. And I think you will find, there are hardcore guys in the various combative sports disciplines that have that.
I'm sure.
For sure there are in wrestling and judo and Thai boxing and whatnot. But yeah, the average person coming into a school looking to learn martial arts for, even if they want to be there for fitness, probably isn't looking for that level of intensity. And you're only going to be able to do that with, generally speaking, the special few.
Yeah, and you guys were special people, and I knew what I could get. I knew what you guys were capable of. At least I knew the baseline, okay, which meant I knew that you guys could do 1,000. If it was your first day, no, you'd get hurt or something bad would happen. But I always knew the limit, the bottom limit. That's all I cared about. If you could go beyond that limit, that's bonus. That's like the cherry on top of the ice cream. I wouldn't do that with you guys weightlifting, obviously, because that was a whole different set of training. But
I mean, there was that one time.
oh yeah. Right. Yeah, we've had some, yeah, we've had some interesting weightlifting things too going down in the days, man. But yeah, those are good old days, and I get it. You're in a different setting, man. You're in a strict commercial setting, which you have to be. And there are professional fight gyms that my stuff like that
Absolutely
wouldn't work either.
Right.
You guys were, like I say, a special case, in a good way. And kind of old school, but yet more, it's like my whole life was violent. My training was violent. So I kind of wanted you guys to get in a quasi violent kind of thing. But if you're strictly into the sport world, you don't need that, but you guys weren't into that. But yeah, those were just good old days. And we worked under the worst possible conditions. No air conditioning, sometimes no heat, concrete, no mats. Remember all that? And it was just like, then we got those tiny little square mats. And then when we got that one little wrestling mat, that was like, wow, we hit pay dirt here. So
I constantly remind my students, not in a harsh and negative way, but like, I'm just like, you guys don't realize just how good you got it. We got air conditioning here.
yeah.
We've got a crash pad. for big throws. We've got, an abundance of equipment. The whole space here is dedicated to this. You don't have machinery throwing
Yeah.
metal shavings anywhere.
Oh,
you know, um,
You know how much
you know,
time I spent on the mat with you? I had to pick this out of your hair, pick this out of your beard and shit. I
it
mean,
was. I don't remember my beard being that much of a problem, but yeah, I definitely have picked metal shavings out of my
oh,
hair.
God. Oh,
And when we
the
talk,
and the
yeah, well, when we talk about this, like there's a certain audience when I tell these types of stories where they're like, yeah, that fucking sounds awesome. And then there's other guys like, how did you do that? Why did you do that? And I'm like, this is what we had to do.
yeah.
Like, like I would, I don't know that it would have been the same, like maybe it could have been possible, but I don't believe we would have produced the same results if we had some cozy posh gym with all the amenities.
No, I don't think so. No.
Yeah.
And the other stories that we can't tell publicly of stuff that went on over there, that wouldn't ever happen. The police would raid the joint, I mean, some of the fun stuff, crazy stuff we done, especially with
Oh, no.
Kevin getting involved.
Yeah. Now you've got people's curiosity going.
Yeah. Oh, let them begin. Hey, Duber, excuse me. Does anybody want? All right, we'll go there another time. But man, the fun shit. I don't even think Joe knows this story. We'll have to talk about it.
I
when
know
we
some
sign
of
off.
them.
Oh man, but don't. Yeah, you're right. I don't think so because it wouldn't have inspired me because I learned under similar conditions. I never was to a boxing gym. I was, but that was never to a martial arts school. So that's all it was all foreign to me. And yeah, man, I go to some of these gyms. I'm like, holy cow, look at this. It's so beautiful, but and I've had hardcore people like Brian Klaus and others that came to the gym like in Bensonville, and they're like, yeah, man, this is and that's a step up from Bensonville. I mean, from Stone Park, but they're like, yeah, this is hardcore, man. This is what we like. This is not commercial. But these are guys that never were at the tool and die shop. I'm like, man, you guys,
You don't even know.
you don't even know, right?
Well, fortunately, we have a little bit of video that survived out there, so
Yeah.
they
Well, the
can
routine,
live
a couple of
vicariously.
my videos are
Yeah.
there. Yeah. I remember people wanting to do a Mecca because this is the home of catch wrestling in America. This is where it all is, the tool and die shop. And even after it was gone, the tool and die shop was gone. I still had a couple people that said, can you drive me over there? Can I just see where it was? And I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. Because I didn't live that far from there. So like, yeah, boom, let's go. Those were the days. And again, I think people came in there. I know there was, there's shit, it's internet, but there was people that came in there. They're like, wow. They're like, you're kidding. This is how you guys train. I'm like, yeah, this is how we train. Good old days, man. I could do that again because that's all I've ever known. I got kind of spoiled going to Bensonville, because that was like a real big step up, but for me, but when I go to other people's gyms, they're nice. They're like, this is awesome. But I'm used to like driving a junker automobile. I'm used to that stuff, for me. But yeah, it's cool. Those are just good old days. We have so many memories. I think one of these days, Javier, we should get together, a bunch of us, and just record, just sitting around together in a group, just our thoughts and our memories before they're lost. And then we'll always have it, posted, like 3-4 hour video of the real history of it. And we could probably talk very candidly about the stuff. That would be kind of cool to do, I think, because my memory's fading quicker than I'd like to admit it. And I'd like to get stuff down. Because sometimes what I need is like, I totally forgot about the Addison Trail thing until all you did is say it and it triggered it, right? For me to just bring it up probably wouldn't happen, but you triggered it. And I remember that. And oh yeah, I did something like that once at Triton College. You weren't there. Same thing, different crew. Got them to do a lot of push-ups and strictly push-ups. But that was a good day. Those were good times. I remember one guy who emailed me about wanting to come and work out. I'm fit. He said, I'm fit. I'm like, I don't know if you are. Just come to the gym. So
Well,
he
that's
showed
a
up,
mistake.
he couldn't make it. He quit like after like 5 or 7 minutes
Admitting
of
you're
our
fit to
warm-up.
Tony, saying,
Well,
Yeah,
no,
it's
and
just,
the
you
guy
signed
said,
your own death warrant at that point.
well, he couldn't handle it. And he's like, oh, you're right, this is too tough. But I'll tell you what, I'm gonna go train and I'll come back in 6 months and then I can be able to handle it. I said, no, you won't. I said, there's no other school in the world that you're gonna get this specifically. The only way to get good in 6 months is to stay here. And I wasn't even charging the guy. He couldn't come back. He just couldn't handle it. It was too much. Just like when you remember that one kid that used to come to Triton, Javier? And I had to finally, you guys made me tell him, like, you got to wash your clothes because you stink. And he hardly spoke.
hey, I started washing my clothes, guys.
No, but he was fine up until the ripping. And I warned him about this,
Yeah.
And the
I
ripping
va-
was,
I was gonna say I vaguely remember this guy, but I can't put a name or a face to him at this point. Like I'd be hard pressed, even if you showed me a picture, to be like, yeah, that's the guy. But I remember
well, Martin knows him.
yeah.
I think Martin knows. I'll have to ask him because the ripping just did it. I mean, he lost his whole emotionally and everything, and that was it. He got crushed and never came back, which I warned him that might happen. I said, don't let it happen to you. And that's unfortunate, but we encounter that today. We encounter guys that you just, they won't accept the ripping. All right, I guess I can't do it. Back in my day, it would have been like, well, then you get out. Leave.
Right.
You can't handle it, go. Now I don't do that. I can't do that. But I guess we should probably wrap this up. We've been going on for almost 2 hours. Joe,
Has
hello?
it already? Jesus.
Almost. Joe, hello,
Yeah.
wake up.
Yeah, thanks. You guys, do we start already? But no, I guess, yeah, in
Or do
some
you
way,
have some closing questions?
well, I actually have some like non sequiturs that could go for another couple hours. And I was kind of reflecting on, in some ways, I'm disappointed in a sense because yeah, we really didn't cover with a resource like Javi with all his diverse experience and exposure. I have a lot of like technical questions that I think maybe he would be one of the few people in the world that could answer those.
We'll have him on again and just do that.
Well, I guess that was my point, is that let's not wait another year or two to have you back. Let's try and make this a little bit more regular, maybe quarterly or something. Or especially if you have like a seminar or something going on at your school that you want to plug, come on in, we'll plug it, and then I'll ask away, because like I said, I mean, obviously you guys have got so many great stories from back in the day that I think everybody want to hear. So I think this was a real success. But then I was like, damn, man, I didn't ask him about this or that or the other thing.
Right.
And
I
it's
mean,
like,
this is just what happens when you put two old guys together. They inevitably talk about the past.
Especially
That's
when
clearly-
there's Italian blood going here.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten to the Elmwood Park era.
Oh, no, we got to get to that next time, right? Well, no, I want to thank everybody though. I've been getting a couple people that are not even martial artists that I've turned on our podcasts that just love them. They have nothing to do with martial arts. And Tom Fiala is one of them. I'm giving them accordion lessons. Hi, Tom. Hi, Jane. They love these podcasts because, it's just a cast of characters. And Tom got turned on when I had Corey Pesatoro on, who was a world-class accordionist, jazz accordionist. And now he's kind of hooked watching all these podcasts. And I told him you were going to be on, Javier. Make sure he's going to watch this. But yeah, I don't get anything out of this other than the camaraderie of having guests on. And of course, you're my dearest friend. You're probably now you may be, well, you and Brian and Bruce are probably the longest, my oldest Chicago friends now that I can think of, because since Kevin died,
Right.
I mean, there may be somebody, again, my brain's not working, that I'm forgetting, but I don't think so. So you guys are like the last ties that I have, because when you said I knew you 99, so I had been living here 12 years. So, at least 2/3 of my life here in Chicago, you've been a part of it,
Right.
and Bruce knew me, I think, since 95. So he knew me a few years before you. So I was here like 8 years. So Bruce, but you and I were a lot closer, like socially and stuff like that. And I'll never forget the blind date you set me up on. Thank you very much. I mean, wow.
Oh, let's not go with that story.
Yeah,
Let's end on a
no.
high note. Come on, man.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Joe,
So-
you were going to ask me those technical questions. Hurry.
Yeah, right. Hey, I'm free for another blind date though now, Javier. So
Like
I'll
when
give
you
you
say
a
that,
chance
does
to
she
make
have to be
amends.
blind?
Well, I want her to find me
Lucky.
attractive, so yes, she probably should be blind, right? Well, anyway,
think I got
everybody,
somebody.
huh?
I think I got somebody.
Good. Well, everybody, listen, thanks for watching or listening either way to the Snap No Tap. And then well, I don't know if we'll have a special guest next week, but we will definitely be on next week. So before we get to next week, I want to wish everybody in America that's listening to this very happy Thanksgiving, because that's going to be in a couple days here, a few days. And Joe, do you have any closing statements? And then Javier will probably have some.
No, just thanks again, Javi, for making the time for us. Obviously, you're busy. I'm really happy for your success and that you've gone full-time coaching. That's awesome that you're sharing all this knowledge. So just keep up with the good work, and hopefully we can swing by the school and see you sometime, and have you, like I said, I will be bothering you to be back in the near future. So
And post his school and all that.
yeah,
on the
please send me
YouTube
links
page.
and any pictures you want posted for social media, of course, and we will get that going so we can plug it. So, but yeah, thanks again.
Thanks for having me on, guys. For me, it's always a pleasure, reminiscing about a time that, for me, it was my youth. It was some of the best years of my life. And I could say this, unequivocally, Tony is one of the most important figures in my life that shaped me, not just as a martial artist, not just as an athlete, but as a human being. So anytime, guys.
Thank you. I'll see you guys next week. All right.
Thank you.